Oh, okay.
There you
I can't see myself
go.
here.
I'm seeing thumbs up, so they can.
Okay, you can hear me because we've got our speaker in, so you can hear people in the audience if they ask questions too. I'm going to give you a little introduction to this. This is data that I'm presenting that I collected way back when, and I mean, it's been a long time, when I was in graduate school. I have to admit, I haven't looked at it much since then, until Sienna decided that we would do something about the, the importance of green spaces in urban areas. And I said, well, I did work on urban parks, so I think this might be a little bit relevant. I went through it all over and over again because I almost forgot what I did. And I haven't really updated what I did, but I did add some other information that I have found out since then. So hopefully we'll be able to go through all of that, and I can show you things that have happened since then. Okay, so, oops. I hope if I turn this on, it is on. Hold on a second, my equipment is acting up.
Technical difficulties.
Oh, no. This was working before. Maybe my battery died.
Well, I'm here.
No. Try one more thing. Sorry about that. I'll just do it manually if this doesn't work. Doesn't work. Okay. All right, so first I want to talk a little bit about urban parks, and I'm then explain to you what the work was that I had done. I imagine everybody here has been to an urban park, and I'm talking about the ones that the Parks Department usually manages. I mean, I guess we can consider Flat Rock an urban park, but it is totally different from the ones that you normally go to. Typically, the urban parks are open as far as understory goes, so you can see, through the trees. It helps to eliminate people that later on I'll talk about. They're considered undesirables. So you don't usually have shrubs, although things have changed a little bit now, and there's some areas that you will find low growing things, but not tall enough that people can hide in them, because you don't want to go to a park and find out that someone's hiding and wait for you. This picture obviously comes from Central Park if you've been to the Great Lawn. All the rest of the pictures I'm going to be showing you came from parks that I studied. Since I did this in graduate school and I wasn't living on the East Coast then, the work that I did, the parks are all located in St. Louis. Oops, sorry. Okay, so urban parks, as I showed you before, you find many trees, you find a lot of open space, but they serve a lot of different purposes, and they're not just open space. Some of them are there for people to be playing, different sports. We actually have a dog park here, which is something that is much more recent. There were no dog parks when I did my studies. Some people just go to sit and enjoy being outdoors, bird watching, a lot of different things like that. So you see different parks. Some of them have many different purposes and many different kinds of spaces. Others are more for just one particular thing, and you won't find a lot of different items or different kinds of setups in the park. So parks can provide a place for active recreation. Many of you are familiar with that. This is, physical exercise, biking, running, playing baseball, soccer, all those things, basketball, tennis. And so the park, of course, reflects that, but it's got the fields and different things. Some parks some parks departments, I should say, make you sign up to be able to even use the fields and things. Others are just open. They can also provide a place for passive recreation. This is stuff like, just resting, relaxing, bird watching, hiking, things like that. You have access to nature. And those are going to be parks that have more areas that look more natural. So what are the benefits of having urban parks around? For one, they reduce health costs. That's because of all of the sitting around and enjoying, the passive recreation, lowers your heart rate, all those kinds of things. So it's the health costs of people who go to them. They do strengthen local economies, especially places that have maybe zoos or other kinds of paid portions, even if it's just, food trucks. The local economies, they like that. The government likes it because they get people attracted to that area, which means they're being attracted to that city and spending money. That's the important thing. Reduce noise pollution. If you get deep into a park, you will notice you don't hear as many cars. I know even here we can hear cars go by, but sometimes it's nice and quiet. Reducing neighborhood crime is one of the benefits that I keep seeing over and over again. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not sure if that's quite true, but this was a lot of the urban parks departments use this reducing crime as reasons for having parks, or being able to tell people that they can have more. And increases natural plant and animal life, especially if it's got an area that is a preserve. And they improve air quality. It's been proven and measured that trees in urban parks can remove a lot of toxins from the air, especially carbon dioxide. Value to cities, if you have enough parks, can be $4,000. Well, for $1 billion. And I think that's the total. So now I just want to talk a little bit, give you some background of some of the stuff you're going to need to know as I go through the different studies that I did and talk about how parks or how the bird communities can relate to the parks. One of the measurements we wanted to make was what is it about a park that can attract bird communities? So went through study of island biogeography, which was originally done by Robert MacArthur and E.O. Wilson. And they wanted to be able to explain distributions of species on islands, or the numbers of species. So this makes all kinds of sense. I'm sure it's smaller, more isolated islands have fewer numbers of plants and animals. The larger ones are going to have higher numbers. Okay, so this is one of the principles that we used in looking at the parks. The parks can kind of be habitat islands. They're not surrounded by oceans. They're surrounded by habitat, the city habitat. It can be very unsuitable for animals to be living there. The nice thing about birds is that they can fly over some of that habitat. So some of the numbers for birds are going to be a little bit different than if you were looking at mammals using the habitats, trying to get through the city streets to get to the parks. It is a little bit different for birds. I just wanted to let you know that the effects of this area of the green spaces in the cities are well documented. I'm not going to go through a lot of different studies. Some of them I will talk a little bit about at the end, but the fact that they're well documented kind of helped in being able to form my own hypothesis and be able to test it. So my hypothesis that I wanted to test, I was actually doing other kinds of work at the same time. So this is only a piece of the work I did, but I looked at the effects of area and vegetational biodiversity. And my hypothesis was that those are significant in determining number of bird species that you find in urban parks. But there's always a but. Okay, it's difficult to separate them. Okay, many parks, the larger parks will have more vegetation, obviously. So it's difficult to be able to separate the park size from the amount of vegetation or the structure of the vegetation in it. And so how do you then measure the effect of the species richness, which basically means the number of species? So to do that, I chose different parks of different sizes, all the way from just a little over an acre up to 1,200 acres. And I also looked at the functions of the parks. Are they really set up for the passive or active recreation, or maybe a combination of the two. So as I said, these were all in St. Louis because that's where I was living at the time. And I chose 7 different parks, and I'm going to go through each one just to kind of explain their sizes and what their composition is. So the 7 parks were all located within the city of St. Louis. They were all on the southern half of the city, mostly because it's a safer area. And when you are a young woman by yourself at 6 a.m., you don't really want to go to the places where those people that are known as undesirables are going to jump out of the bushes. So I kept it all in an area where I knew I could go. They're all owned by the city, maintained by the city. So they're not private like we are here, or and at the time there were not conservatories or things that ran parks. Everything's run by a single central parks department. Every one of these parks is located in a business, industrial, or residential neighborhood. Some of them, it's a mix. You can't really tell from this map. Everything looks green here, but it's not green. When I show you some of the overhead photos, you'll be able to see that they are all islands surrounded mostly by homes. And none of these have green areas, contiguous green areas outside the park's boundaries, which would mean, like another park immediately attached to it, or something that has a corridor that connects it to another park. They really are pretty discrete. Okay, so this is the first park. Forest Park is close to 1,300 acres. To give you an idea, that's 50% bigger than Central Park in New York City. The land was first purchased in 1872. I did use the age of the park as something that I could try and test to see if age and size had something to do with the number of species. And I'll give you the results of that later on. This park attracts 12 million visitors every year. Now, they're not just going to the park, because it's a park. They're going to the zoo, or, there are a lot of different facilities at this park that people go to. And that's one of the reasons it gets so many. So on the south side, which is, I'm going to try this, down along this way, and up on the east are highways. The one on the south actually divides part of the park. There's a little area of park on the other side of the highway. It's centrally located in the urban area. I don't have a separate picture of this. The last one I showed with all the different parks circled around, it was the biggest one that you saw in that. Surrounded by a lot of residences, business dwellings. Just because I have to show you this. Over here is where I was born, and over here is where I went to college, just so you know. But yes, it's very, very urban around it, just like all the other things. And it's got a lot of roads to the park, like Central Park does. A lot of cars are constantly driving there. I used to cut through there every day, I think. Whoops, what happened? Sorry. Okay, this is just a close-up picture of the park, just so you can see. You can see that it's got an area up in the upper left corner that's all golf courses. It's got natural forested areas. It's got a lot of play fields. The zoo is there. I can't even tell in this picture with the zoo. It's probably that kind of left bottom, I think. That's the parking lot. So it's very well used. The amenities, much of it is used for passive recreation. Okay, people visit because there's a zoo, there's art history museum, art museum, science museum, a theater, all those sorts of things are all in the same park. And that's where those 15 million people come from. And they most of them are going there. This is the art museum. It's a great hill when it snows. Okay, as I said, in the southwest corner is a forest. So this is one area, it's 100 acres, which is 2/3 the size of us here. That's pretty sizable considering the park is, about 1,300 acres. So, it's a pretty good area for just a natural forest. I think they probably let it grow over time rather than planting it as a natural forest. But you can see it's very overgrown. The park has huge areas for active recreation. I already showed you, they've got the golf courses there. This is just an area, it's probably about 5 acres or so. If you consider one football field is an acre. So everybody would just come play games. All those little lines that you see across there are people standing there. And one of the best parts about this, you see these little white spots over here, and there's some more over there, and there's a bunch back here, and then there is a flock of geese in a V flying over. So even when there are 15 million visitors and there are all these people, you know, going to these play fields and playing games and, you know, spectating and everything, there are still the white spots are egrets in the trees. So I'm assuming this was taken late summer, early fall, but you know, even the park is large. They've got a lot of space for birds in addition to all those people. Second park is called Carondelet. This is the 3rd largest park in the city. I skipped the 2nd largest because I'm trying to get more of a variety of sizes. Again, it's in a very urban area. As you can see, it was purchased at the same time the Forest Park was opened the year before Forest Park did. And again, it's all urban and has a highway that goes across and, you know, basically cuts through a corner of the park. Most of Carondelet Park is cleared of understory. These are the trees. This is what it looked like for the most part, except for one little section where limestone chambers had collapsed underground and they let everything grow. So this is one fairly small section where the lawns are kept mowed around it, but all the part, and you know, where the sinkhole is, they had to let it grow because they couldn't get anything in to cut it down. So that's the reason why that's there. Most of the park is used for active recreation again. There are a lot of picnic grounds for passive recreation, but a lot of athletic fields. And these athletic fields are mostly lit, so they're being used during the day and again at night. The next park is Francis Park. That's only 60 acres. We're getting down a little smaller. Again, it's in the middle of the South City. It's surrounded by residences, churches, and one of the schools uses it for playground. Francis Park is the same as most of Carondelet, and where it doesn't have much understory vegetation. It's got a few shrubs that are ornamental. And there's a lily pond that extends most of the length of the park. So there is water there. It does have playgrounds. I tried to get photos that were more the timing that I actually did the work, because the photos that I have disappeared someplace. I have a few of them with me that the colors faded. So most of these came off the internet, but I tried to get things that looked more like they did when I actually did the research. So some of the playgrounds that you see here are very old and no longer there anymore, but it does show that they were there. There were areas of the park that were set aside for this kind of play, in addition to tennis courts and handball courts and baseball fields. And I hope that's not one that they charged, although that's a soccer field. That's why it doesn't have grass. Okay, next was Tilly's Park. It has nothing to do with Tilly or Bird. Okay, this is even smaller. It's 30 acres, which is half the size of the Francis Park, the one I just showed you. Whoops. Okay, it's the youngest park in the study. It was not established until 1948. Again, it's in an urban area. It's fairly small. So it's really considered a neighborhood park, not a regional park. And you can see that there are a lot of fields here, not very many trees. It's got the lowest tree density of all the parks that I looked at. And at the time of the study, most of them were very, very young, under 9 inches. And I want to explain to you what DBH is. It's the diameter of the tree at breast height. So just about at 4.5 feet, if you measure the diameter of the tree, that gives you an idea of a lot of things. First is the age, depending on the species. The bigger trees, of course, are going to have bigger canopies. They're going to have more foliage on them. And that's something that I end up using later. So I'm going to be mentioning DBH a lot here. Trees under 9 inches means that they're mostly saplings. They're fairly small trees. And so there really wasn't a lot of shade here either. So the primary function was neighborhood playgrounds, active sports fields, and this is what much of it looks like. Next was Gravois Park. This says it's dedicated to Uncle Louis Buckwitz. I have no idea who that is, but this is just a little square neighborhood park. It was the oldest one in the study. And you can see 1 square block, big trees, no fields there really to speak of. This was mostly there, I guess, as more a passive recreation park. It does have, the trees are larger, greater than 15 inches in diameter, which points to older trees because it is the oldest park. However, you could see there were a lot of young trees there, under 9 inches DBH, and that was evidence that the park was maintained. They, were replacing old trees with young ones as the old ones, got too big, got cut down, got blown down, whatever. This is like the only part of the park that I could actually find anything that was not grass or trees. A very small, I guess it's a basketball court, but for the most part, it was really for passive recreation. Bella Reef Park, only 6 acres. This one was established in 1908. This, I have to admit, I think it was my favorite park. It was along the Mississippi River. Below the river, or I'm below the park, I'm between the park and the river, is, you see this gray line? That's railroad right of way. Oh, it's not doing well. There we go. Right along there. The land to the north and the south, here and there, is all industrial. And then leading up to it was all residential. But it's the only park that actually had anything, on one side of it that was not just homes or buildings. So much of the park, that leads to the river, it's really there for people to sit and look at the river. It was very steep slope. It was fenced off so people couldn't get down on that part. And because it's fenced off, you can see that it also was not maintained there. Everything growing there was just growing on its own. Over the years, that grew even to be greater, more overgrown. And more recently, I read that there are people that have been complaining that they can't see the river anymore. So they've been trying to talk the city into cutting down some of that so they could still have the view. And yet these are the same people, not just have a view, but to be able to maintain the park as a good place for birds to come and visit, because they like to do both. The park has playground equipment, but it's not big enough really to have athletic fields, and it's very narrow and skinny. So it's very different than all the other parks. It's very popular at sunrise because you're looking east over the river. So it's enjoyed a lot for passive recreation. It's the second smallest of all the parks that I studied, but its bird species diversity was very high. Here I said highest among them. I really think it's second highest. Okay, finally, there's Carondelet Lions Park, not to be confused with Carondelet Park. This is very small, 1.7 acres, fairly new, established in 1929. Whoops, my picture's behind there. I thought I fixed all that. It's bordered on 2 sides by industry and it's surrounded by residential neighborhoods. I'm not going to try and adjust that now, but you can believe me, it's just a little square park, and there's not much there. The only trees in the park were along the borders. Most of them were very small, trees, saplings less than 9 inches in diameter. Its primary function is just to be an athletic playground. So you could probably imagine about the only thing that I saw there were birds that are usually associated with humans and things that are, that you see feeding on the lawns. And I'll talk about what those birds are later. You could probably already guess what they were though. So those are my 7 parks, all different sizes, a lot of different purposes. Some have natural areas, some don't. So I could then look at them and try to determine, besides area, which was already established, that area is very important in the number of bird species. What is it about the parks that we could attribute to the number of birds that show up there? Now, I did this work only in the summers. So all the birds that I looked at are summer residents. I was not there during migration time. So all the migratory birds are not included. So the number of species does look like it's lower than you normally would think it would be. So the first thing I did was monitor the bird populations. I did a census by just walking along a line. This is an example of a census line. Okay, and counting all the birds, identifying all the birds within 50 feet along each side of the line. Okay, so in the bigger parks, I had to do several lines. Smaller parks, I could actually, run 2 or 3 lines and I would have the entire park covered because they were so little. But what I did was walk parallel lines that are 100 feet apart and count the birds up to 50 feet away. So the transects in small parks, I was able to do the entire park, and in the larger parks, the 3 largest parks, I just did a portion of the park. But when I did that, I incorporated ran the transects so that I went through each type of habitat that the parks have. So some of it was lawns, some of it was the natural areas. Other parts might just be, some of the places that are full of the large trees. I also did vegetation analyses. Okay, so again, the smallest parks, I could do the entire park. And that was pretty much because the vegetation is mostly trees. It was just identifying trees and measuring their diameter at breast height. And this is not me in this picture, but this shows how it's done. So you have a stick, and I have to show this to you. A Biltmore stick, and it's, show this to people at home. It's got markings on it. You can hold it up to the tree and you can see how wide your tree is, what the dimensions are, the breast, I'm sorry, the diameter. Now, I told you already, this is a mistake. Oh, it's not. I lost most of my photographs, but the thing I didn't lose was the stick that I made to carry with me in the parks. This is the actual stick that I measured all the diameters with. And I just had to bring it because I still have that at home. It's amazing what you keep for 40 years. And yes, it was 40 years ago. So I broke down the diameter of breast height is, wait, I'll bring this back. When I measured, I just broke it down into size groups, 3 to 6 inches, here 6 to 9, 9 to 12, 12 to 15, and then greater than 15 inches. And that's what I marked off on here because I didn't care about individual numbers. Now, you know how many trees you have per acre, but that doesn't tell you how much foliage you actually have. And that was why the diameter breast height really helped. Whoops, going backwards. Okay. So what I did was for each of the trees, I calculated the basal area of the tree. That's basically the cross section of that tree that you can calculate from the diameter or breast height. So I calculated basal area that's very commonly used to measure how much timber might be in a wood stand. What I was using this for was to determine basically how much foliage is there. Bigger trees have more leaves, smaller trees have fewer leaves, their canopies are smaller. So I use those numbers to calculate the total basal area per acre that each park had. Took an average because in some parts, you know, that there are more trees than others. But this is a little illustration just to kind of explain to you. You can have a lot of small trees, or you can have one big tree, and you're going to have the same basal area and pretty much the same amount of canopy in each one. So I was really looking at the basal area as a measure of how much canopy there is to tell me how much vegetation there was in the parks. Because for the most part, as I already mentioned, we don't have any understory. It's just stuff up above. So I looked at 7 characteristics, characteristics of the 7 parks. Number of bird species I got from the bird census. The abbreviations on the top are in the order from largest to smallest, so you don't have to remember the names of the parks, but the park area I have on here, the average basal area, which I just mentioned, per acre, the density of trees, the different number of tree species, and the park age. So I took all of these things from the biodiversity index on down to park age to see which ones of these would best be predictors of the number of bird species. Biodiversity index is not to be confused with the number of bird species. Actually, that I didn't use that for trying to determine number of bird species. I actually looked at that as being determined by all the other things. But the biodiversity index takes into account not just the number of bird species, but how evenly spread are the species, the individuals of different species. So if we have 100 species and there are 20 of each one, that will have a very high index. If you have 100 species, but 99% of them are starlings, you have a very low index. I looked at that, discovered that our biodiversity indexes were pretty low for all the parks because, and I'm going to see if there's one next slide, because a minimum of 76% of all the birds in every single park were only 2 or 3 bird species. So that just shows that they really didn't have much biodiversity. So instead of using biodiversity as an index to measure, I used the species richness, which is just the total number of species. Otherwise, I've got the same answers with every single park. Of these birds that made up that 76%, most of them were starlings. We also had robins, grackles, house sparrows, and pigeons, which should all sound pretty familiar to the birds that you probably find around your homes, unless you have really nice forest attached to you. But that was mostly the list. These densities were really high, between 125 birds an acre in Cronlet Lions, which was the park that was really just the smallest park with the most or the highest percentage of baseball fields and diamonds and things like that. Up to 448 birds per acre in Carondelet Park, which is the second largest park. Now, imagine 450 birds, let's say, all feeding on a single football field. That's what that number means. So that's why I kind of ignored the whole idea of how many of each species and just looked at the total number of species. So these are my results. I found that park area and the amount of the vegetation substrate, which was the basal area, which I used to kind of calculate how much foliage there was. Those are the 2 most important at determining the number of species. I'm not going to show you the formulas that I came up with. Actually, the computer came up with them. But when I took both park area and the basal area and put them into the formula, you can see the predictions. 27 birds and species in Forest Park were actually found 28. 27 actually found 21. That's probably the farthest away in predictors. The others are really close to the number of species I actually found. So I can tell you that the area plus the basal area are the best predictors. If we looked at area alone, that's the second to the bottom line, the numbers were not as good. They didn't predict it as well. So putting both of them together does mean, I found that to be a much better predictor, and having the parks of different sizes as well as different densities of foliage is really what made me able to make that kind of prediction. So my conclusions: the area is the most important physical parameter to determine the species richness, which is number of species. The amount of vegetation available also contributes significantly, and between the two of them, I was able to then predict, well, over 95% of the numbers pretty closely. So what would I recommend from this? Well, if I were going to make recommendations on managing a park for bird species, okay, and remember, that's what we're studying here. So a lot of people think that the main reasons that parks should exist is for, people to be able to go and have a place to ride their bikes or play baseball or something like that. So these would be very different kinds of recommendations if that's the kind of study I was doing. So the sizes of parks, if you look at them and you're looking in these cities, you can't make these parks much bigger unless you start knocking down homes, and that's probably not going to happen. So you're kind of stuck with the size you've got. So if you're stuck with your size, then you need to do something about the vegetation in it. You can add smaller trees and shrubs so that they eventually, can grow to be bigger trees and shrubs. Plant them among the medium to large trees. You just want to make your complexity of vegetation greater so that you can attract more birds. Wait a minute. That just gave me the same thing. Okay. Now, recommendations by others kind of hit the same thing. Now, this goes back all the way to 1972 because that was the data that I was using, when I was doing my research of other kinds of studies. But someone had recommended what he called planned neglect. Just let the stuff grow. Don't cut down your trees that die. Let them stay hollow so you can attract more things like woodpeckers that make hole in the trees, and then maybe even attract some owls that would use those holes. So that's, one of the things he's saying is let things stand, let it be natural. You can put in shrubby patches. He's the one who says put lower shrubs and maybe some fencing and things like that to keep undesirable users out of those areas, so they can't go hiding in the bushes and jumping out at you. But to retain the habitat for wildlife, kind of the same kind of thing. You just want to make it more complex. You want more vegetation. So I told you I did this a long time ago. I looked at other studies since then that have been done and tried to limit this to people who just studied urban parks, because there are a lot of studies of urban areas where they're looking at the differences between the urban area into the suburbs, and looking not so much at the parks as islands, but just this, continuous kind of transition from the cities to the suburbs. I ignored those. I'm only looking here at people who studied urban parks. And it's kind of interesting because they're all over the world. And I didn't find too many in the States, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing. Like study in 1999 in Finland, the occurrence of breeding species depends on the size of the park structure, and the landscape structure. Melbourne, 2006. Now, this is a little bit different, but I thought it was kind of interesting because they said that pedestrian traffic was not correlated with species richness. So remember, I talked about Forest Park, which had 15 million visitors. Apparently that, according to the people in Melbourne, that really would not affect the number of birds. And we did have most species there. In London in 2007, again, the site area was most consistent variable that was related to species richness. Spain, 2007, park area again, and this was a study over 6 years. And they found that the area was more important than habitat diversity. Tel Aviv, 2008, the parks that are intensely managed have lowest species richness. Again, they're saying that it was associated more with woody plant species. They didn't say anything about size. In Germany, park size. Mexico, higher in parks than gardens, green space size was the most important. So I think we got the idea. It's the size of your space. Again, 2011 in Melbourne, park size. Brazil, abundance and diversity. They're saying better predictors than the degree of isolation and the park size, which is kind of interesting. Degree of isolation is how far away from other green areas is it? But they didn't find park size. This was probably the only one I came across that didn't use park size as one of the determinants. And then finally, there was another one in St. Louis. They did this over several years. There were a lot of people doing this, and they were also using surveys that had been done by other nature groups there. So they had a lot more data than I did. But again, habitat diversity and the developed area within the park are the important things. And then is it for data that's 40 years old. It's still pretty relevant. Any questions?
We do have one real quick on online. Tammy wanted to know, do you think the river / water along that skinny part, she forgot the name, had an effect on the species of birds?
You know, I didn't bring my species lists with me. I mean, I have them, but they're not on one of my slides. When I look at the species that it attracted, no. I mean, they were pretty much all the same birds over and over again. And there was really not, as I recall, there was nothing there that I didn't find in the other parks. And I think partly because there is a pretty good sized border between the park and the river. You would think, and it was summer. If I went there during migration, I'd probably be giving you a different answer. Yes.
In the parks, right, there's plenty of industry. You ever find any birds that have been injured by in the very commercial birds?
I did not see, that's really interesting. I didn't really see any injured birds. It could be that, you know, they had been already picked up or eaten or something like that. If, you know, if it were a time when other things were out preying for, you know, the other predators were out, but I didn't see any that had been injured. Yeah. Yes, Steve.
So I know the parameters you were using, the park size was maybe the most important, and then the next one was, I guess, the amount, the variation, I guess, in the species. Did you find that there are certain specific species that would actually attract more diversity? For instance, if there was a lot of different types of trees, if it had 40 different types of trees and covering the same amount of area versus 10.
Okay, if we, wait a minute, I'm gonna go back here. Oops. All right, so one of the things I looked at was number of tree species. You can see in the largest park, Forest Park, which has the natural area, there were 111 different species. It really didn't make a big difference. And, you know, and when I did all of my statistical analysis, I plugged that in. All these things were plugged in to see which ones would actually be good predictors of the number of bird species. And tree species did not come up as one. And I'm thinking, you know, in part, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we had the talk about invasives.
Right.
Well, you know that in these parks, I mean, I've got a list, I think it's 4 pages long of trees, and many of them are non-native trees, because remember, these are parks. They put things in from all over the world. So that could be one of the reasons why the tree species did not really have anything to do with the number of bird species.
That makes sense.
Was there time when the number of trees in the bird population or species?
Well, when I was measuring the basal area, it doesn't really take into account the number of trees as much as you know, the, let's say amount of foliage there would be. So if we were in a place that had a lot of small trees, or in a place that has one big tree in an area, they could actually have the same effect. So the number of trees in an area, it didn't seem to affect it as much as the part of the tree that the birds would actually be using on, you know, which would basically be the leaves, the foliage. Yeah. All the flocks I saw, for the most part, were feeding off the ground, though. You know, those were all the starlings and the robins, you know, all the things that are ground feeders. Most of them are things that are introduced, but they're all the stuff that you see feeding on the lawns. And those were the ones that I could actually call flocks. The others were really individuals.
Nothing online right now. Does anybody else have any questions here?
Okay.
All right. So I'm just go there. So thank you so much, Rosetta, for a very informative and interesting presentation. Thank you all for joining in person and virtually. We will be having, I believe there's one more left in our series. Dr. Eric Kiviat. And that one will be in about sorry, I'm like missing my dates at this moment. I believe, what?
It's 2 weeks.
2 weeks? Okay, sorry, their schedule is a little crazy this year, so the frequency messed with me. So thank you all again so much, and thank you so much, Rosetta, for an amazing presentation. I hope everybody has a great evening and joins us for our last installment. All right.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you all. I guess I have to end.